wizard, a paladin, and a barbarian walked into a bar. The village asked us to slay some goblins, and an archer named Logan is hired to show us the way to their den. Logan, by the way, apparently has a beard, which everyone but the DM forgot about. Whoops. And now we're at a shrine. Anywho, the paladin starts praying because he's suffering religious withdrawal or whatever, and says he wants to get on the spirit's good side. Meanwhile, Logan whips out a guitar and starts jamming like it's nothing special. Torek decides to listen, but then Logan tries to start up a conversation. All of Torek's answers are indirect and at one point result in Torek flirtatiously wiggling his eyebrows at Logan for some reason I don't remember. Eventually, Red, the barbarian, cuts in and starts barraging Logan with all kinds of personal questions like, what's your deal? Where's your family? Are they dead? Logan, slightly flustered, proceeds to explain how he was orphaned as a child during the war and recently lost his wife after she encountered the deck of many and drew the balance card. Choked up, he tells everyone he needs time alone and tries to leave, only to suddenly faint dead away. Now at this point, I feel I need to mention something I didn't say in the last video. You see, Torek and Red are both chaotic, so as you can imagine, they aren't really concerned for the guy. For example, Torek's immediate reaction is to grab a stick and start poking him. But then Red, the barbarian, says we need smelling salts to wake him. Of course, no one has any, but Torek does find a pen and ink in his bag, which gives him an idea. They graffitied the guy's face. And to top it off, the barbarian made sure to write "Edoit" on his forehead. As we're finishing up, Red looks at Torek. Wait, we can't just leave him like this. He has no family. You're right, Torek agrees. No one's gonna miss him. And they proceed to add orphan on his face while Red steals his cape. It's at this point it occurs to them that maybe he fainted because he tried to leave. So then Torek suggests they toss his unconscious body outside the shrine and see if he explodes. Of course, Red agrees and we gather him up to get ready for the throw, only for the paladin to finally take notice and yell, "What are you doing?" Torek, startled, drops Logan on his head, and we explain that there may be something magical that caused him to faint. Surprisingly, the paladin decides to let us proceed, and we toss him outside the clearing where nothing happens. Seeing this, Torek steps out without a second thought, and the party proceeds to put the guy on our wagon and head onwards. We make it to an abandoned mining town where the paladin spots a sleeping wolf and goblin in the nearest structure, then proceeds to break down the door and rip them to shreds mercilessly. As it's dying, the goblin lets out a shout, and another goblin on a wolf comes galloping towards us. The paladin steps forward and starts to rush the monster while Torek and the barbarian hold back. Red suggests Torek ride on her shoulders so they can both charge into battle. Torek doesn't approve of this and instead asks to be tossed on the nearest roof for a good vantage point. The first try is more of a push as Red fails her strength check, but on the second attempt it works and Torek turns to prepare to fight, only for the paladin to already have killed the wolf and goblin. However, it's at this point Torek notices that the paladin has looted the corpse of 6 platinum. Up till now, we've been sharing our loot, but this guy right here, he pockets it without a word. That ain't gonna fly. So Torek flops off the building and casts sleep on the paladin. He and the barbarian proceed to use sleight of hand to nab the coins without waking him. Torek pulls a nat 20 and gets off scot-free while Red fails her roll and gets caught immediately. Before the paladin can do or say anything about it though, more goblins, wolves, and rat swarms come our way. At one point, Torek combined one of his cantrips with Intimidate and starts shouting demonic noises at 3 times his volume towards the enemy, successfully scaring the goblin away. The rest of the enemies are essentially killed by the paladin and barbarian as Torek stands back, safely out of reach. At one point, Red loots 2 more platinum, but since we already have the 6 we stole from the paladin, she decides to give them to him. While pocketing them, he realizes his coin purse is rather light and finds his other coins missing. He immediately knows it's Torek since he saw Torek cast sleep on him. Now, here's where it gets iffy. He tried to use Intimidate on Torek, but since we're both players, we weren't sure if it would work, so we asked the DM, who decides to throw more goblins and rat swarms at us. So, in the end, the session ended on the archer being graffitied, the paladin being robbed, and both Torek and Red 6 platinum richer. Our guide, Logan, is now awake. Turns out he fainted because he crit failed a will save when he tried to leave the sacred shrine earlier. Anywho, the group sets up camp outside of the abandoned town. Logan decides to camp away from our trio for obvious reasons, and in the morning they notice a hobgoblin and a warg standing outside the mine entrance as guard. Torek summons a rat to sneak up and look inside where they find more enemies. The group decides to make a plan of attack. This time, Red suggests that she toss Torek on top of the cave entrance so he can attack from above. But Torek wants to try something new and climbs on Red's shoulders. Excited for this plan, Torek once again makes demonic shouts and scares the hobgoblin back into the cave, and just as Red starts rushing down the hill, he falls off. Without a second thought, Red picks up Torek like a football and continues charging down the hill towards the mine. After a few seconds of this, Torek gets nauseous and asks to be put down. At the mine, Logan then announces that he'll be leaving since his archery will put him at a disadvantage in the cave. Inside, they find an enormous wooden door that's been closed tight. In a moment of bravado, the paladin tries to kick it open, though it turned out that the door opened the other way, so instead of opening it, it just breaks off the hinges. We're greeted by a group of enemies, and a battle ensues. Once again, the paladin deals most of the damage, but Torek has a few good moments where he puts 2 of them to sleep, then rolls a crit where he freezes one to death. After looting the room, the paladin, Alzahar, is reminded that Torek robbed him of platinum and asks for it back. Torek, not wanting to comply, instead shouts, "Oh hey, what's that?" and books it down the nearest hallway. Of course, the entire group knows this is a bad idea and chases him down before he runs into any more enemies. Alzahar tries to use the spell Command to stop Torak. Torak passes his will save, but slows down anyways. There, they negotiate that Torak only has to return 1 platinum. As Torak is about to toss it over to the paladin, Alzahar looks Torak in the eye and says something like, "Don't doom us all over such petty actions." Boy, you have no idea. Torak will doom whoever Torak pleases. So, Torak drops the platinum on the floor and backs up like, "Come at me, bro," while his mage hand flips inappropriate gestures at the paladin. This results in Alzahar essentially losing his temper and tackling Torak to the ground, where he threatens to do much worse in the future if he continues to be this stupid. As he gets up, Torak decides to sick his rat on the guy. Of course, his familiar can't actually attack, but it can cast a touch-based spell from his spellbook. Unfortunately, he doesn't have any offensive spells, so the most he was able to do was make his boot glow, which of course doesn't work either because Alzahar passes his will save. Before Torak can do anything more ridiculous, Red comes up from behind and knocks him unconscious. A good full rest later, Torak wakes up to find that they had camped in the mining shaft all afternoon. Fully recovered, they proceed through the dungeon and set a room of sleeping goblins on fire. While the barbarian and paladin are holding the door closed, Torak sneaks up and pulls a nat 20 to steal the 1 platinum back from Alzahar. As they proceed through the dungeon, they find a room where the goblin leader is sleeping, and Alzahar utterly overkills the guy, dealing over 30 damage in 1 attack. At this point, Torak starts second-guessing his recent actions and decides that looting the room would be a much safer option to robbing the paladin. At this point, the entire group is now level 3 due to the sheer amount of enemies that they've encountered so far, and since they're currently standing in the middle of a goblin-infested mine, odds are they aren't done yet. With only a small portion of the dungeon explored, Torak has Mr. Squiggles the rat investigate further down the tunnels. There, they discover a kitchen and a forge with more goblins, rats, and hobgoblins. They also find a chapel and a room full of makeshift beds. At this point, they realize they have a lot of enemies to go before they can proceed to the second level. When deciding which route to take, Torak enthusiastically votes for the direction of food and they head towards the kitchen. Once again, the paladin tries to kick the door down, but this time it opens the right way and only slams open, somewhat startling the goblins inside. As usual, the paladin jumps headfirst into the fray. Now let's recap. Every time the paladin goes first, he kills everything and gets first loot, leaving Torak and Red to hope he shares, or else Torak has to rob him just to get any treasure out of this adventure. Torak, however, is very squishy. He started with only 6 hit points and is dealing with monsters that could deal 8 to 12 points of damage if they got a hold of him. Naturally, his battle plan has always been to hide behind the nearest meat shield, or else climb to the highest point so he could safely cast his spells without being targeted. But with Alzahar bulldozing his way down the dungeon, using him as a meat shield was no longer an option. Not if he wanted any of the treasure. Plus, seeing how powerful the paladin was, he didn't want to risk ending up on the other end of his blade when he was caught stealing from him again. So Torak decides to barrel his way into the room and cast Flaming Sphere. Not wanting to be left out, Red storms into the room and obliterates the nearest goblin, spraying goblin parts all over Alzahar and the wall behind him. Alzahar then used Thunderous Smite and incinerates his nearest target, once again proving just how OP he is. Torak is feeling a little inferior at this point, but doesn't want to admit it, so he moves his Flaming Sphere in the middle of the fray, targeting everyone but himself, and successfully kills 3 goblins at the end of their turn. While he may have also burned the other 2 members of his party, Torak killed something. More importantly, he killed something intentionally. He cries tears of joy, causing Red to ask, "Are you alright, dearie?" But before they could celebrate, more enemies are heard coming from the back door. Encouraged by his recent victory, he rolls acrobatics to slide across the table between him and the door and gets a nat 20, allowing him to do a fancy little flip at the end. As he lands, the DM mentions that the goblins had food set out on that table. So essentially, Torak is standing proud, covered in cooked human flesh, grinning ear to ear, ready for another battle. Kinda horrifying, honestly. Torak's Flaming Sphere is still going as he moves it to the door entrance, where some rats are quickly incinerated, while Alzahar rushes into the room and kills the goblins with some surprising help from Torak's divination. Alzahar turns and tries to give Torak a bloody high five. Torak, however, sees this as an attempted attack and hides behind Red. Alzahar just grins and nods, then proceeds to loot the room. To Torak's surprise, the paladin shares the loot. Apparently, the paladin had always planned to share the loot, but only if it was well earned by the others. This reminds Torak that he had stolen 1 platinum from Alzahar earlier. So far, the paladin had noticed his missing coin every time he took his coin purse out, and Torak didn't feel like getting caught again, not after seeing him essentially disintegrate his enemies. So Torak decides to use sleight of hand, but this time to sneak the coin back into his purse. With 1 more room ahead of them, Alzahar kicks the door in and charges towards the nearest goblin inside. Torak spots a hobgoblin in the corner and notices that it appears to be in charge of the goblins in this room, so he estimates that it's probably really strong. Not wanting to risk the paladin having the glory of killing another dungeon boss, Torak uses his divination ability to land a crit with a 2nd level chromatic orb. In 1 massive bolt of lightning, he overkills the hobgoblin and deals 49 lightning damage. As it dissipates in a puff of ashes, Torak starts to rethink how weak he really is, then learns that he just killed an ordinary hobgoblin. At this point in the dungeon, we come across a locked door that Mr. Scribbles can't quite fit under. So what does the paladin do? A horrendous odor hits us and the paladin uses Detect Undead to find a pile of zombies lying on the floor. His eyes light up. Alzahar practically skips into the room with a massive, crazed grin on his face and holy smites the shiznit out of them. While Torak would have loved to help, it was obvious that the paladin really wanted this for himself, so for the most part he stood back. Once done, they find a chest at the end of the room. Alzahar smashes it open and finds 5 banded agates. He hands one to Torak to inspect but finds no magical properties. With that, he pockets the 4 and lets Torak keep the 1. Looking over to Red, she shakes her head, utterly uninterested in shiny pebbles. We find another room, this time guarded by skeletons. After Alzahar finishes them off, Torak rushes to the chest and tries to smash it open, but instead stubs his toe and falls over. Alzahar just shakes his head and smashes the lock open. As he does this, Torak thinks back to the first chest and realizes that the only reason he got to keep an agate was because Alzahar needed him to inspect it. Now that they know that they aren't magical, the paladin had no reason to hand him any more gems and would most likely pocket whatever he finds from here on out. Not happy with this, Torak dives for the chest as soon as Alzahar opens the lid and snatches all 10 obsidian stones. Alzahar glares daggers at Torak, who, not being the bravest, regrettably hands over 5. At this point, Torak and Alzahar have spent almost all of their spell slots for the day and decided to barricade themselves in the room to prepare for a long rest. Red, the oldest in the group, just shakes her head. We take turns guarding the door and luckily nothing attacks us. During his rest, Torak has a dream that he's falling towards an arcane circle covered in infernal writing. Before he can try to read any of it, everything goes black and he wakes up. Proceeding onwards, we come across what looks like a church door. Alzahar inspects it, but since Torak already had Mr. Squiggles investigate and find no enemies in that room, he tries to rush in. However, Alzahar is blocking the way, so Torak, being too weak to shove him aside, drops down and tries to crawl between his legs. Alzahar just looks down and clenches his legs together, strangling Torak. Torak is left gasping, "Let me go!" and knocks on the door in defiance. Eventually, the paladin lets go and they find a chapel with a statue of an unknown god. The barbarian passes it up, the paladin knocks it over because it's not his god, and Torak steals the gems that were scattered around it. In the next room, they're attacked by rat swarms. Torak is nearly killed by the time Red gets them off him, and the paladin turns around and slaps Torak with a rough lay on hands, shouting, "Get it together!" Stunned, Torak looks at the rat swarms on Alzahar and attacks, successfully killing them off. In the next room, Alzahar once again gets to smite some undead. Torak is now completely aware that the paladin can and probably wants to handle it on his own. So when he spots the chest in the corner of the room, the first thing he does is rush over and smack it with his staff. The other 2 look on in disbelief, but are quickly surrounded by the 5 undead. As they fight, Torak continues to hit at the chest, desperate to get to the treasure before the paladin has a chance to. Unfortunately, Torak has noodle arms and can't quite break it open. But he's not giving up! A grunt of frustration draws his attention back to the battle where Alzahar had missed his attack and was currently holding back a zombie with his sword. Red was in the back dealing with another undead, and things didn't look like they were going as well as he had assumed they would. He glances down at the chest, then at Alzahar, then at Red, then back down at the chest. He raises his staff hesitantly, trying to decide what to do. A cold sweat breaks out as he struggles with his overwhelming greed. His indecision is apparent as he starts to shake visibly while holding his staff up. Closing his eyes, he eventually swings his staff and lands a nat 20 ray of frost on the undead attacking Alzahar, killing it permanently. Exhausted by his inner struggle, Torak slouches to the side and lets Alzahar try to smash open the chest. After failing his strength check, he pulls out a lockpicking kit and opens it with ease, finding 6 moss agates. Of course, Red and Torak are left wondering why the heck he kept smashing things when he could have just been picking locks this whole time. He turns to Torak and hands him 3 agates. Not knowing how to say thank you, Torak sputters and accepts them awkwardly. The paladin then mentions that the stones are essentially worth the same as platinum. After hearing this, Red suddenly realizes that she's been gypped. Torak has Mr. Squiggles check the rest of the dungeon. After finding various monsters in other rooms, he turns to the group and says there's nothing to worry about as he snickers under his breath. In the nearest room, they hear some monsters talking. Mr. Squiggles squeezes under the door and finds 2 hobgoblins torturing a caged goblin that was screaming, "Maglubiet is here, he'll destroy us all!" Torak instantly knew that this was the same goblin he scared earlier with his thaumaturgy. Giggling to himself, he tells the rest of the party to go ahead and kill them all. Which they do, but only after the paladin nearly gets killed himself. One of the halls leading out of the room has collapsed into an entirely new floor. Red and Alzahar are moving onward, but Torak, being the curious sort, sends his rat to investigate. There, he finds a nearly empty room decorated in marble with an enormous locked gate. This was the boss room. Torak knew it, I knew it, but no one else did, and I didn't say squat. In the center of the room was a small group of 5 monsters. The 3 goblins were arguing with the 2 hobgoblin masters, warning them that danger was coming. Torak waved the group down and had them come over as they listened in on the argument. "We need to attack the village!" "But we can't! Maglubiet is coming! We're all going to be destroyed!" "Don't be ridiculous! Maglubiet is a myth!" Hearing Maglubiet's name again gave Torak an idea. Getting a little closer to the hole, he cast Thaumaturgy. Right as the hobgoblin stopped talking, ominous whispers began to fill the room. "See? That's not possible! Torque then uses thaumaturgy again, this time to make the flames on the nearby torches burst and brighten. I told you! The goblin boss cried, and like that, the goblins and the hobgoblins began fighting each other. The group climbed down and finished off the remainders, then snooped around the enormous gate. As they did, Torque began hearing mysterious whispers and became entranced by the door. Red spotted a hand-shaped print next to the gate, but when she tried to put her hand on it, nothing happened. She then called for Torque to give it a shot. Still somewhat mesmerized by the whispers that only he could hear, he sets his mage hand on the lock. Nothing happens. So he puts his right hand on the print. In an instant, a searing blade slices through his wrist, cutting off his hand and dropping it into a small hole just below him. The runes on the gate begin to glow, and the door slowly opens. Torque is in shock. He's still standing there, arm outstretched, frozen stiff. Slowly, he begins to shake as he looks down towards the stub. His hand was gone. Before he could even mentally recover, he feels a pair of extremely strong arms pick him up and toss him inside. In the center of this boss room was the same summoning circle he had seen in his dream. There was a table with a wand, a spellbook, and a gauntlet on it. The whole room seemed to have infernal symbols written everywhere, but Torque wasn't taking any of it in. Slowly, he curls up into a ball and cradles his arm. Elzahar then stomps into the room, kicks over the table, and promptly carries Torque out, for the first time showing some sort of compassion. He sets Torque down outside the gate and hands him some water to try and calm him. Red then pops up behind the paladin kind of awkwardly. She hands Torque the stuff from the table, and when Torque finally starts to come to his senses, she points to Elzahar. He totally tossed you into that circle. A sudden fever overtakes Torque and knocks him unconscious for 5 hours. When he finally wakes up, he takes one more look at his missing hand and begins to scream at the top of his lungs. As he's throwing his hysterical fit, Red and Elzahar start fighting. Eventually, Elzahar offers an agate, which causes the greedy wizard to stop his thrashing and snatch it up. Once he's sure Torque is calm, he returns to his fight with Red. The fight gets pretty petty when the paladin drops his weapons and challenges the barbarian to a wrestling match. When Red just laughs at him, Elzahar throws a pebble at her. In an effort to stop them, Torque attempts to cast sleep on the pair, only to have the spell fail. Elzahar notices this and becomes concerned about the wizard's lack of magic ability, but Red blocks him from interacting and reboots their argument. Sighing in frustration, Torque notices a treasure chest with 55 platinum and runs over to it. As he does, he also realizes that Mr. Squiggles is now missing. Not sure where his familiar went, he grabs up the coins and spots a hobgoblin tied up in the corner. Apparently, Elzahar had decided to leave one alive and tied them up for questioning while Torque was busy dealing with his missing hand. Who's this Maglubiat guy anyways? Maglubiat is the god that goblins worship, though it's more like fear. Curious to see if he had any of his previous abilities still, he attempts to use thaumaturgy again. Sudden whispers surround the hobgoblin and he gasps in realization. It was you! It's your fault the goblins began rebelling! No, it's your fault I'm even here! No, it's all your fault! No, it's your fault! No, you! No, you! At the same time this is happening, Red and Elzahar's argument had turned into discussions on morals regarding what the most merciful way to kill a hobgoblin would be. They stop to listen to the pointless bickering, but are interrupted by a group of rats that suddenly attack. Out of instinct, Torque tries to cast Ray of Frost, only to have flames burst forth and insta-kill the nearest rat. A split second of confusion later, he realizes he's also on fire, but the flames don't hurt him and he one-shots another rat. Not sure what's happening to him, Torque decides to take the items from the summoning circle and study them in a separate room. While the other two of the party are busy dealing with a jabbering mouther, Torque attunes to his wand and opens his eyes surrounded by treasure that the party had decided to leave next to him as he meditated. Picking up what looks like a glass orb, he hears a voice. Yay! I'm at your service! New orb, who dis? Is that my name? Since Torque had no intention of keeping this simple crystal ball, he decided that he didn't need to think too hard on what to name it. It's Porkchop. Your name is Porkchop. The group arrives, covered in grotesque remains of the jabbering mouther, and start reading from a journal that they found in the nearby room. It was a lengthy journal, so Torque decides to try and attune to the crystal ball as they read. A short rest later, Torque learns that the orb was just a drift globe, and he'd actually named his wand Porkchop. Footsteps are heard outside, and they peek into the hall. Elzahar asks Torque to cast light on his sword so he can see better. For the first try, he accidentally casts True Strike on the sword. For the second try, he casts Poison Spray, which very nearly killed the paladin. No longer trusting his own magic, Torque shouts Blatherskite and activates the drift globe. Logan appears from the dark hallway and introduces Captain Deb as a new party member hired to hurry along the extermination. Deb is eager to help finish off the remaining monsters, so Torque secretly scoops up the 55 platinum and they hurry on to the next door. Once again, they're approached by undead. After Elzahar attacks, Torque attempts to squeeze in, but there isn't enough room, so he crawls between the paladin's legs and points his new wand at the nearest enemy. 3 bolts of fire shoot forth and kills 2 of them. After that, though, Torque wasn't as lucky as his unpredictable magic continued to shoot off random, useless spells. A few times, Torque sets alarms on the undead and the sound would go off as the rest of the party cut them down. At another room, Alzahar fails to kick down the door and Torek fails to headbutt it open. Red is the one who successfully breaks in and looks around. After finishing off a good portion of the dungeon, they decide on another rest so that Torek can get a hold of his powers. As he attunes to his new spellbook, Red makes rat stew. This reminds Torek that Mr. Scribbles is still missing, and he immediately suspects the soup, but he's hungry too, so he eats it with a small sob. After one last long rest, the party finds the rest of the undead. One room has about 8 of them. Torek, now in control of his magic, casts a second level Burning Hands and kills 6 of them. After finishing off the rest of the dungeon, the group exits to find the outside field covered in goblin corpses. Logan approaches them and decides to inspect the cave to confirm that they actually did their job right. They head to their old camp and find an addict's kit in Logan's things. This upsets Alzahar greatly and he decides to reprimand the archer when he returns. Torek, in the meantime, finds out he can speak with animals due to a miscast spell from earlier. One bird tells Torek about his troublesome cousin who had to go to birdie jail and would be executed because, in the bird world, that's the only acceptable punishment. Logan returns and Alzahar nags the man, who demands an explanation for the undead. Alzahar and Red, who read the journal, then explain that his wife became a necromancer and used the cave for experiments before moving to the capital with their unborn child over 10 years ago. Torek and Red then slinks up behind this horror-struck drug addict. You gonna pay us now or what?